Oh, the river's wide, the road is long. Since the break of dawn I've been walking here. Music. My heart stays strong, though my feet are heavy. Hold on to the glory. Chore struggles after emancipation. Black families in Georgia were told they were free in the years after the Civil War, but freedom did not feel like life in Augusta and the surrounding towns. They had no land, many of them, no money, and no protection from neighbors who were hostile. To keep freed men tied to the same soil where they had once been enslaved, white landowners quickly learned to use contracts and false promises. In Richmond County, families found themselves tricked into agreements they could not escape, though they thought they were starting new lives. Often, sheriffs and judges sided with landowners, declaring debts where none truly existed. The cost was added to a growing account he was forced to work off if a man could not pay for seed, tools, or even food. Women, too, were trapped, sometimes bound to houses as domestic servants under conditions not so different from those of slavery. By 1915, an entire generation of black children had grown up in this shadow of freedom, carrying the heavy knowledge that the law did not protect them. In church meetings and whispered prayers, the hope of emancipation was still alive, but daily life remained harsh, unfair, and dangerous. Jim Crow's rise. By 1915, Jim Crow ruled Georgia. These laws made sure that African Americans in Augusta knew their place in the eyes of white society. Separate sections were in streetcars, schools were divided by color, and even public fountains reminded black citizens of their second-class status. Voting was nearly impossible. Black voices were silenced at the ballot box by poll taxes and literacy tests, making it clear that equality was only an empty word. Augusta, known as a city of commerce and culture, also carried this heavy contradiction. While white men laughed freely in taverns along Broad Street and Green Street, black men risked beatings for stepping out of line. If he did not have proof of employment, a young black man could be arrested for so-called vagrancy. Once jailed, he might be leased out to local farms or factories, forced to work under brutal conditions. These laws and customs were not just rules. They were tools of control. They allowed landowners, sheriffs, and businessmen to treat human beings as property long after slavery was supposed to be over. In this world, taverns became places where power was displayed openly and young black lives could be bargained away, as if they were tokens in a game that was cruel. Economic exploitation. By the early 20th century, the trap of sharecropping had caught most black families in Georgia. On paper, it looked like an agreement. The landowner provided a piece of land, a mule, and seed, while the black family did the planting and harvesting. They were supposed to share the profits at the end of the year. But across Richmond County, and in Augusta, this system was little more than slavery by another name. For tools and food, landowners inflated prices, charging double what they were worth. When the harvest came, the debts always seemed larger than the profits. Families ended the season owing more than when they began, though they worked the fields from sun up to sundown. Young children joined their parents in cotton rows, pulling sacks nearly as long as their bodies. Women carried babies on their hips, while hoeing the soil, never able to rest. Many men were lured into signing contracts they could not read, binding themselves and their families for years. Sheriffs were quick to enforce the landowner's claim if anyone tried to leave, often dragging men back in chains. This cycle of debt and false promises made freedom feel like a cruel joke. The people of Augusta's black neighborhoods knew they were legally free, yet the economic chains kept them tied just as tightly as the iron ones had done in generations past. This reality set the stage for even darker abuses that would follow in the city's taverns. As centers of power, taverns. In Augusta around 1915, Taverns were more than places to drink. They were gathering spots for white landowners, merchants, and politicians, men who controlled the city's economy and its laws. On Broad Street, where commerce bustled during the day, these taverns came alive at night with smoky air, loud laughter, and deals whispered over mugs of beer. Decisions that shaped the lives of entire communities were made behind the swinging wooden doors. At tables, land disputes, labor agreements, and even criminal cases were discussed casually. For the men inside, a tavern was a private courtroom, a trading floor, and a playground all at once. Black workers rarely entered except as servants, carrying trays or cleaning floors, forced to watch as their futures were decided without their voices. Some taverns became notorious for their darker role. Stories spread of young black men and women being treated as bargaining chips in games of cards or bets on horse races. A teenager could be offered to settle a debt or passed into the control of another landowner, with nothing more than a handshake. The city outside saw only the lights and music of Augusta's nightlife. But within those smoky rooms, human lives were reduced to tokens of exchange. For black families, the knowledge of what happened inside these taverns added a heavy layer of fear to their daily lives. They understood that their freedom, already fragile, could be stripped away in a single night if the wrong men made the wrong deal over a drink. Dehumanizing exchange. Before we continue with our story, if you're enjoying it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next real stories about slavery. Let's continue. Inside the taverns of Augusta in 1915, the most shocking reality was the way young black lives were reduced to objects. To white landowners and businessmen, a boy of 16 or a girl barely grown was not seen as a human being with dreams and family, but as a form of payment. Debt, wages, or broken promises could be settled by offering a black youth as currency. The cruelty was casual, hidden behind laughter, games of chance, or drunken conversations. For the men inside, it was entertainment, proof of their power and dominance. A simple card game could end with a teenager being handed over to another man, who then used that life for farm work, household labor, or worse. These transfers often happened without the young person even knowing their fate until they were taken away. Families could do nothing to stop it. Mothers and fathers who worked the fields were powerless when a white sheriff or merchant claimed their child had been won or traded. The practice carried echoes of the slave auctions that had once taken place in public squares. But now it happened in private, hidden behind the doors of Broad Street taverns. The community whispered about it, but speaking openly was dangerous. For black residents, the message was clear. Their lives could still be bought, sold, or gambled away even 50 years after emancipation. The humanity of young people was stripped from them, and they became chips in a cruel game of power, corruption, and complicity. These crimes did not survive by accident. They were protected by a web of corruption. In Augusta, tavern owners knew what was happening within their walls, but the prophets kept them silent. Local sheriffs, often drinking alongside the landowners, chose to look away. Sometimes they directly participated, enforcing the transfer of a young black man as though it were legal. Judges and city officials, many of whom relied on these same businessmen for political support, made sure that no accusations ever reached a courtroom. The complicity was not just in law enforcement. Bankers extended credit to landowners who openly boasted about controlling hands as if they were assets. Merchants supplied taverns with goods, turning a blind eye to the darker dealings happening in back rooms. Even church leaders, eager to remain in favor with powerful men, often avoided speaking against the injustices they knew existed. For black families, this wall of silence meant there was nowhere to turn. Reporting a crime to the police was useless. Often it resulted in punishment for the victim instead of the perpetrator. Communities in Augusta's black neighborhoods, like those near Sand Hills or the Turpin Hill area, lived under constant threat. They knew that if a child was taken, the entire system would stand against them. This network of corruption allowed the tavern trade to thrive in secret, feeding off the power of white men and the vulnerability of the black population. It was not just a few individuals committing crimes, but an entire structure that ensured injustice remained untouched. Captivity's life. For the young black men and women traded in Augusta's taverns, life after the exchange was a form of captivity that mirrored slavery. Once handed over in a deal, they were taken to farms on the outskirts of the city or forced into houses as unpaid labor. Many were teenagers, their futures stolen before they even had a chance to build one. A boy sent to a cotton farm in Burke County might spend his days under the burning Georgia sun, working from dawn until long after dark with nothing but scraps of food for payment. A girl sent to a wealthy home in Richmond County often faced endless cleaning, cooking, and the silent fear of abuse. Escape was nearly impossible. If a young person tried to run, local sheriffs acted quickly to return them, sometimes whipping them in public as a warning to others. Without legal protection, these children became invisible property, hidden behind respectable doors. Families who lost a son or daughter to a tavern deal carried the wound silently, knowing that any protest could bring violence on the entire household. For the victims, days blurred into years. Their lives were dictated by the whims of men who believed they owned them. The illusion of freedom after emancipation was shattered, replaced by a cruel reality that one's life could be taken in a single night's game of cards. These stories show how the shadow of slavery lived on not in chains of iron, but in the chains of power and silence, resistance, and whispered outrage. Despite the fear, black communities in Augusta did not remain entirely silent. In churches scattered through neighborhoods like Bethlehem and Harrisburg, pastors preached coded messages of resistance. Hymns sung during Sunday service carried double meanings, words of biblical deliverance that also spoke to the hope of earthly freedom. Families gathered after dark in small wooden houses, sharing whispered stories of what happened inside the taverns, warning others to protect their children. Mothers taught sons to avoid walking near Broad Street at night, and fathers organized quiet watches when rumors spread of another exchange. These acts of resistance were small, but they carried deep meaning. To resist openly would have brought swift and brutal retaliation. White mobs in Georgia had lynched black men for less, so the resistance lived in whispers, in secret prayers, in the survival of culture, and in the determination to pass down truth. There were also brave individuals who tried to fight back. Some fled north to cities like Philadelphia or New York, sending letters home that spoke of a different life, one where a man could keep his wages and vote without fear. Others risked everything by hiding runaway youths, giving them shelter until they could disappear across county lines. Still, the cost of resistance was heavy. Families caught helping could lose their homes, their jobs, or even their lives. But even under such danger, the outrage burned quietly. The memory of injustice was never erased. It lived in the songs, the sermons, and the determination to endure. This silent defiance kept alive the hope that one day the truth would be told. A hidden reality in 1915. In 1915, Augusta was known as a thriving southern city. Broad Street displayed busy shops, carriages, and the growing presence of automobiles. The city's white residents celebrated modern progress, boasting about new industries, railroads, and schools. But beneath that image of growth, a hidden reality persisted, one that never appeared in newspapers or official records. In back rooms of taverns and on farms outside the city, young black lives were still treated as property. Outsiders passing through Augusta might see only the grand houses along Green Street or the lively storefronts downtown, never realizing that just a few streets away, entire communities lived under constant fear of losing their children. The practice of using human beings as currency was carefully concealed, whispered about, but never acknowledged openly by those in power. This dual reality made Augusta a city of contradictions. White residents spoke of freedom and Southern pride, yet the freedom promised to black families was nothing but a fragile illusion. Local authorities maintained the facade of law and order, while silently allowing crimes that mocked the very idea of justice. Even national laws, meant to protect freedmen, were powerless here, smothered by a culture that preferred silence over change. The year 1915 is remembered in history as part of the Progressive Era, a time when America claimed to be moving forward. But for many in Augusta's black neighborhoods, progress meant nothing. Their lives were trapped in a hidden system that the outside world refused to see. Legacy and memory. The pain of those years did not disappear. Survivors carried their stories into old age, telling them quietly to children and grandchildren, who sat close to listen. In neighborhoods like Turpin Hill and Sand Hills, elders recalled nights when sons never returned from town, or when daughters were taken and never seen again. These memories became part of family histories passed down not in books, but in hushed conversations around kitchen tables. For many decades, few dared to speak publicly. The fear of retaliation lingered long after the practice itself faded. Yet memory is powerful. By the mid-20th century, younger generations began piecing together the truth, connecting whispered family stories with the larger history of slavery's afterlife. They realized that what happened in Augusta was not just cruelty, but part of a pattern that stretched across the South. This legacy still matters. It reminds us that freedom is not simply declared by law. It must be protected by justice. The stories of those traded in taverns show how systems of power can disguise slavery in new forms, hiding exploitation behind contracts, debts, or even casual games. Remembering this history is an act of resistance in itself. The memory of Augusta's hidden slavery lives on as testimony. It is a warning that silence enables injustice, and that the fight for dignity and equality must never be abandoned. By telling these stories today, we give voice to those who were silenced a century ago, ensuring they are not forgotten.